Hey everyone, welcome back to Personal Injury Perspective with Chad Hastings. Today we're covering a heartbreaking and deeply disturbing tragedy, the shooting at Annunciation Catholic Church and School in Minneapolis. A 23-year-old armed with a rifle opened fire during a Wednesday morning mass. In just minutes, 2 children were killed and at least 17 others were wounded. Our thoughts and prayers go out first to the families and to the community shaken by this senseless act of violence. As difficult as it is, part of what I do here is to look at these tragedies through the eyes of a personal injury lawyer. Not because money can ever replace a life, but because families who lose loved ones, in many cases, ask the simple question, do we have a legal case? And that's why we're here today. That's what we're going to explore today. So let's get into it. The shooter, who has since been identified as a 23-year-old parishioner of Annunciation, had ties to the church and had been seen there before. Reports show that just hours before the attack, he posted troubling videos and writings online, including YouTube, signaling his mindset and his intentions. On the morning of the shooting, he approached the parish during a service. Importantly, one of the main doors to the church was locked, and this turned out to be a crucial barrier to his entry. Unable to get inside, reports say that he opened fire from outside through the stained glass windows and doors. Witnesses described chaos. Parishioners were diving for cover, parents shielding their children, teachers shielding the children, and the scene turned tragic within moments. By the time the gunfire ended, 2 children, just 8 and 10 years old, had lost their lives. 17 more parishioners, many of them also very young, were injured. Law enforcement confirmed that the shooter died at the scene from self-inflicted gunshot wounds. The aftermath has left the community reeling, and with many asking how something like this could happen inside a place of worship and whether anyone could have prevented it. With those facts in mind, let's look at the legal side of this, the potential defendants, whether any of them could be held civilly, legally liable. So let's talk about the potential defendants. The first defendant that most people come to mind would be the church or the school. The second defendant would be the shooter, and the final defendant would be the gun store. A natural first thought for most people is, could the church or school be sued for not having enough security? In Minnesota, landowners and organizations don't automatically owe protection against crimes committed by strangers. The duty only arises if the crime was reasonably foreseeable. This means that there were prior threats, there were similar incidents, or there are special warning signs. Here, the doors were locked. That measure actually stopped the gunman from entering the building. He had to fire outside because he could not get in. As far as we know, this wasn't a high-crime neighborhood. There's no report in the news or record of prior warnings or threats specific to this parish that have been reported on. Given these facts, from a legal standpoint, it would be hard to argue that the church breached a duty by failing to have armed guards or additional security. In personal injury, we call this foreseeability. Could the church have foreseen this awful shooting to have occurred? Unless new evidence comes out showing prior threats or ignored warnings, a negligent security claim here is very difficult. Now, let's move on to the shooter. He is legally liable, of course, but he's uncollectible. The shooter himself is clearly responsible for this devastation. If he were alive, he would be personally liable. As he's dead, his estate could certainly be sued. But he died at the scene of the accident, and practically speaking, there's no insurance or assets that would meaningfully compensate these victims coming from this shooter. In civil law, we call this being judgment proof. So while liability is obvious, financial recovery is not from the shooter. Now, this weekend, a family member came to me and said, Chad, why would anybody sell this maniac a gun? Isn't the gun store liable? Any claim against the gun store requires an analysis under negligent entrustment and requires us to look at federal law. This leads us to the gun dealer. Federal law indicates under the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, or the PLCAA, gives licensed gun sellers broad immunity. Families cannot simply sue a gun shop every time a legally sold firearm is used in a crime. But there are exceptions. The biggest one is negligent entrustment. And this is where a seller knew or should have known that a buyer was unfit to possess the weapon. That could include selling to somebody visibly intoxicated, making threats in the store, or engaging in a straw purchase. Now, Minnesota law itself does not forbid a sale just because a customer seems unstable. To be disqualified, a person must have been adjudicated mentally ill, committed to treatment, or otherwise be legally prohibited. If the shooter had never been committed, had no court orders, and passed his background check, the store had no statutory duty to refuse the sale. That means unless evidence surfaces that the store ignored obvious red flags like bizarre behavior during the purchase or family members warning them not to sell, the PLCAA immunity almost certainly blocks a case. And from what's publicly known, this maniac's writings and on YouTube posts, they're really troubling. But these are not the things the store would have seen at the counter or during the point of sale. As the news reports, the sale happened long before this incident. So if we're approaching this from a civil side, there's a harsh reality for families. Financial recovery is difficult or impossible. So if a family came to me for representation, here's what I have to tell them. The church likely cannot be held liable. There seems to be no foreseeability. And in fact, its locked doors may have prevented an even greater massacre. The shooter himself, very highly likely uncollectible. And the gun shop is immune unless strong evidence of negligent entrustment appears, which so far doesn't exist. That leaves the families without a meaningful civil remedy in this case. And that is an incredibly painful truth. Our legal system does not always provide a path to accountability in civil court, even for some of the gravest harms that happen in our society. So here is my justice scale rating. On the personal injury perspective justice scale, I give this case a 1 out of 5. Liability is clear in the moral sense, 2 children dead, 17 others wounded. But civil law requires not just liability, it requires a collectible defendant. And in this case, the likely defendants either have immunity, no duty, or no assets. That means from a civil court perspective, the families are left grieving with little hope of justice through the civil courts. This is one of those moments where you realize that our civil justice system really does have limits. And sometimes, tragically, it can leave families of tragedies like this without the accountability that they deserve. On an unrelated note, I have also heard some commentary in the news about thoughts and prayers and how God should be dismissed in this matter because he did not protect the church during this mass. However, while horrendous loss of life and other casualties are not dismissed or minimalized by me, just imagine if that back door was unlocked. I consider it a miracle that more innocent people were not killed and injured that day. What do you think? What do you think would have happened if the back door was unlocked, or if he somehow was able to get inside the church and start shooting people? Leave the comments below and we can talk about it. This has been Personal Injury Perspective with Chad Hastings. My heart and prayers go out to the children, just 8 and 10 years old, their parents, and the entire community devastated by the shooting. If you found this breakdown helpful in understanding how the law approaches tragedies like this, please follow along as we continue to look at whether victims in high-profile cases can truly obtain justice. Like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you next time on Personal Injury Perspective.